Hi, my name is Ali, and today we will be discussing the biology of behavior, starting with the most basic concept of nerve cells, or neurons. So, I kind of just gave you the definition of a neuron, a nerve cell, and they exist throughout our bodies, in our brains, our spinal cords, and throughout all of our extremities to help us function as humans. So, what you may not know is that there's three types of neurons. We have sensory neurons, we have motor neurons, and finally, we have interneurons. While they all go by different names and they have different functions, these three structures all qualify as neurons. So, to explain the function of each, let's think of a little example. Let's look at this person, and let's say it's you, with your brain and your spinal cord. And now let's say that a bee comes along to sting you in the foot. You know it hurts, and you know you gotta kick it away, but how does your body know that? Well, neurons are at work. The first thing to happen is a sensory neuron picks up information from that bee sting and sends it to your spinal cord and to your brain. Then you're gonna kick it away, but how do you know to kick it? Well, your brain sends information and your spinal cord send information to that original site through motor neurons to tell you to kick. Now what happens in the middle there? How did your sensory neurons, how did your motor neurons communicate? And how did your brain and your spinal cord communicate? That is where the interneurons came in. The interneurons communicate within each other, amongst each other, outside of that initial site. So, in summation, your sensory neurons receive information from your outside stimuli. This is the input of information. Your motor neurons react by sending information outwards with output, which is that kick that you had to perform. And then finally, your interneurons work with amongst your different nerve cells for communication within your body. And when all three work together, your body can function and respond to different stimuli effectively. Now that we understand the concept of a neuron, let's look at its structure. Some people think this is complicated, but I remember the structure of a neuron with a simple acronym. DCAT. Not decaf like coffee, DCAT. Okay, so we're missing green. So what does each letter stand for? Well, D stands for dendrites. C stands for cell body. Some books might write down soma, so I'll put that in here, but it's the same thing. Then you have axon and your terminal buds. Okay, so now let's draw a neuron together and discuss its structure. First, you have these random extremities, and in pictures they look kind of like webs. This is what we'll call our dendrites, which connects to your cell body, that then connects to the axon, and then finally to another web of extremities that houses our terminal buds. Okay, let's go through this in detail. So this first part, we said were our dendrites. Your dendrites are responsible for receiving information from other neurons, the input of information for this cell. The dendrites receive information that then travels to the cell body. And your cell body is like that basic cellular part that you learn in biology with your nucleus and all those other organelles. And then from there, that information travels through your axon. This is probably one of the more important steps. Okay, now let's focus on this axon for a second. Within your axon, you have a process known as action potential. Action potential is that transfer of information from one end of of your neuron to the other. It's a series of chemical processes that allow for that electrical signal to actually pass. The electrical impulse of this neuron occurs in action potential in the axon. Now, this little structure around your axon is known as the myelin sheath. And while it's not the site of your action potential, it actually allows for your action potential to run more smoothly and effectively. Without your myelin sheath, you could develop different diseases or disorders like multiple sclerosis. And then finally, once that information transfers through your axon, it reaches your terminal buds to be transferred to your next neuron. The terminal buds are the sites where your next neuron connects itself. Sometimes multiple neurons connect themselves to receive information that one neuron already had. Okay, so information in a cell always moves in one direction, from your input in your dendrites to your output at the terminal buds, with the very important step of action potential happening right in the middle. Okay, so now that we have this concept of the structure of a neuron going on, let's think about what's happening right here, and here, and here, and at all these sites where one neuron attaches itself to the other. How do these neurons communicate, and what's going on at these spots? So let's think about that. These spots are called synapses, or one synapse. If we think back to that acronym we used, DCAT, and we think of this to be the most basic representation of a cell. Don't show this to your teacher, this is more of a study method for you. We have that other cell over here with that same structure going on. DCAT. Your synapse is the space right between these cells. It's this space right here. So we're going to say, for our definition of synapse, it's the gap between neurons. And what happens here? Communication. So what exactly does that entail? Well, we know that the synapse has a terminal bud, which we represent in green, and a dendrite. And we know that the synapse is a gap, which means these two never touch. Instead, it's a space between your terminal bud and that dendrite. Now, information, like we said before also, always transfers in one direction. So your terminal buds, once they receive information from that action potential, are going to release chemicals into your dendrites. And these chemicals, you probably know this, you've probably heard this name before, and now you know what it means. It's a neurotransmitter. Let's write that down. Neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters are chemicals responsible for communication between two neurons. So these chemicals or hormones or whatever your book tells you come in different shapes and sizes, and they all have different functions. You probably know about some of them. Serotonin, dopamine, these are all neurotransmitters that your body releases. Later on, you'll learn how drugs either inhibit or mimic the function of neurotransmitters to reach their effects. But right now, we're just going to focus on this simple process. So once the neurotransmitters are transferred from terminal buds to the dendrites are going to receive them, and they're going to stop this flow once they've had enough. Once they've had enough, they're not going to receive any more neurotransmitters. Their receptor sites are all filled up. So all these receptor sites along your dendrites are all filled with neurotransmitters. And what's left is all these little neurotransmitters left in that synapse. So the final process of communication here is reuptake. Reuptake is this process where your terminal bud reaccumulates whatever excess neurotransmitters are left in your synapse. Sometimes when reuptake doesn't happen and your synapse is cluttered, this could cause different disorders within people and within their nervous systems. So reuptake is a really important part of communication between neurons. So now that we've discussed the types of neurons, the structure of neurons, and the basic functions of communication within neurons, you're pretty set on understanding how the basic structure of the nervous system and the interworkings of the nervous system work.